Good morning to everyone. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Baukultur and the Federal Foundation of Baukultur and what we do, what work, and the status of Baukultur in Germany. I will start by introducing the Federal Foundation and the word Baukultur, what it means in our definition. And then I'll tell you a little bit about our publications we publish. We have a Baukultur report on the status of Baukultur in Germany. We publish every 2 years. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. And then I go further into the direction of digital measures and how they connect to Baukultur. But I start with our Federal Foundation. It was founded in 2006 by the government to initiate a broad debate amongst building professionals on the quality of Baukultur, to make the general public aware of the subject of Baukultur and to encourage discussion on the subject of Baukultur amongst local authorities and state administration. And as I said, we publish a status report on Baukultur every 2 years. Now to the word of Baukultur. What citizens connect with Baukultur? We did a survey and most of them said maintenance, renovation and protection of old and historic buildings, also urban planning, city planning and design, and style and aesthetics of the building. This is of course true, but not the whole picture. We also asked public administration, and that gets more to the point. It's still 94% of them said style and aesthetics, but it's also local identity, planning and process quality, cost efficiency, sustainability. Because when we think of Baukultur, we think of 5 elements. I don't know if you know the triangle of sustainability, which consists of social participation, environmental sustainability, and economic added value. And we add to that space and design quality and planning and process quality. And with these 5 elements, we can talk about Baukultur. There are a lot of people working in the field of Baukultur. 9% of the employed in Germany, 4.22 million people, because it's not only architects and planners, but it's also the building industry, rental and leasing, trade and building materials, building finishing sector, main construction sector. So a lot of people, which explains the big part of the gross value added in Germany that Baukultur plays. It's 18.5%. If you compare that to the car industry, which is only, I think, about 4 or 5%, you find that the public value of Baukultur is not yet there where it should be, maybe, or the recognition of the importance for also the economic of a country. But we're getting there. As Professor Dr. Bögle said, the Davos Declaration was signed by various ministers of culture of Europe. It's a declaration towards a high-quality Baukultur for Europe, so the word has entered the international field. And I'll quote, "This was done knowing that everywhere in Europe, general loss of quality in the built environment and open landscapes is apparent, which manifests in a trivialization of building, a lack of design values and interest in sustainability, in increasingly faceless agglomerations and irresponsible land consumption, in a neglect of the historical building stock, and in the loss of regional identities and traditions." So there's a lot to do, and we're trying to do that with our network. We're not working alone. I'm sorry that not every slide is translated. We don't have every graphic translated in English, but I'll translate for you. So it's in the middle, it's the foundation of Baukultur. And then it's the government, it's the architects, the designers, but it's also the sciences, the culture and media, networks and initiatives, private builders and investors, and of course each and every citizen, because Baukultur is important to everyone. Now to the Baukultur reports I already mentioned. We had one 2014 and 15 about the big cities. Then from that we came to the smaller cities and villages, rural areas. Then our built heritage, the Baukultur report 2018-19 with the title Heritage, Presence, Future, which I will put my focus on today because I think it fits best the program you're working on. And this summer we published the Baukultur report, Public Spaces, because you will find that Baukultur is not only about buildings, but also, of course, about built landscapes, streets, canals. Everything that's built by people is important to Baukultur. The Baukultur report is not something we write alone now at our desk, but we try to involve as many people as possible. So we're of course doing research, surveys, we have forums, events, expert discussions. So we always say that more or less about 2,000 people are involved in the process until it's getting published. Then it has a political process with a debate in the parliament and a resolution proposal, but also a public presentation, and from then on we try to distribute it to as many cities and municipalities as possible and to the public through various events and publications in newspapers, etc. So we already, the new Baukultur report, we already have distributed, I think, about 10,000 copies from June on, so we try to spread the message. I'll start with the Baukultur report 2016 and 17 because the Baukultur report Heritage, Presence, Future builds up on that. We have a simultaneousness of uneven development in Germany. We have growing and shrinking cities at the same time, which explains a little paradox that we are trying to build 1.5 million new apartments until the end of 2021, whilst having 2.1 million vacant apartments in Germany. They are of course not in the same area, but still it might not be the best solution to just destroy the ones we have at one place and then build new ones, but instead we should try to have a polycentric approach to build up on metropolitan areas so that the big cities and the rural areas can work together. This also fits the needs of the public. We have done a survey where the result was that if it was independent on the financial situation or work situation, most of the people, 80%, would like to live in rural communities or small and medium-sized towns. Only 20% want to live in the big cities. So if you provide the necessary infrastructure, you could help the big cities which are overflowing with people. This might be because a third of them said they prefer to live in single-family houses, which is a little bit of a dilemma for Baukultur, because usually they are built on the outskirts of small villages, and the village center, community center, falls empty and to decay. So we have undefined city and village outskirts and an empty center, which we call the donut effect. So we have dying municipalities, which what we want to have is a vital municipality, like a filled donut. So the good is in the center, in the middle. But it's not only an aspect of life quality if you're living in this community, it's also a thing for ecological aspects, because if we use more and more settlement areas and for traffic infrastructure, this is also a problem for the climate, of course. So if you look at this graph, you see that we use more and more space for the same number of people in the last 20 years, which might be explained by our increasing need for living space per person. 1950, it was only 14 square meter. Now we're at 46.5 square meter. And we are trying to save more and more energy. But due to this fact, we have a rebound effect, more or less. So even though we managed to save a lot of energy due to new building measures, we are not. We have the same end energy consumption, and of course, we should not use more and more land, which could be, which is important for agriculture or nature as well. So what we should do is activate potential of fallow land and vacant lots In Germany, there are still a lot of them, twice the area of Berlin, which we can develop, but also look out for possibilities for conversion, like addition of stories, building extensions, conversion, repurposing, reuse, and if everything else fails, also replacement construction. Which brings me to the Baukultur Report 2018-19, Heritage, Presence, Future. The lifetime of products. If you look at a smartphone, it's 2.5 years, a car 18 years, and when we come to houses, it's 100 years up and even more than 750 years old. So with building houses comes a big responsibility, and because they're during a long time, and that also explains that most of Germany already is built. If we estimate the buildings that will come in addition to what's already built until 2030, it's only 8%. So more than 90% of the buildings that will be up in 2030 are built. And so we have a lot of material stock already brought in the built environment. It's almost 400 ton per inhabitant, which means, if we translate it, that every one of us is carrying around a big ICE, like the fast trains in Germany, behind him, from small to old. And that's also a big responsibility, what we are doing with this built heritage and how we develop it and bring it into the future. Already 2/3 of the residential construction works are on existing buildings, and the tendency will be like more 3/4 or more. So it's not a bad thing, because the population also prefers old buildings, according to our survey. Home for them is the place of childhood, a particular building, and as a danger to home is seen the closure of old established business, new buildings in the center. So there's a big civic engagement also for existing buildings. Every fourth person has already campaigned for the preservation of a building. Almost half of the people can imagine donating money for the preservation or renovation of a building. So, and also there's a high approval for reconstruction in Germany, which is seen critically, of course, but you have to consider the fact that 80% of the citizens are in favor of a reconstruction, even if the use is a completely different one than it was originally. So 64% are pro-reconstruction no matter what, which brings us to some funny images like this one here in Potsdam, where our foundation is situated, where you see the new modern building in front and the old historic high-rise in the back, because we have reconstructed, of course, the old castle from scratch. But we do have a lot of historic city centers in Germany, almost 900. We do have a lot of monuments, 650,000 monuments, more than that, and 1/3 of them are considered threatened or urgently in need of renovation. So there's urgent need to do something about that, but not only the historic monuments, but also the buildings up from the 1950s, because we had a big war damages in major cities from 1939 to 1945, of course. Some of the cities were destroyed to over 80%. So we have a lot of buildings from the 50s, 60s, 70s. However, the appreciation in the public is the highest for older buildings, so 1918 and earlier. And the lowest for the buildings from the 1950s to the 1990s. However, those are the ones that are mostly in need of renovation, because they are 30 to 50 years old, so they have their life cycle done, and a lot of times they are demolished because they are not appreciated enough to make the effort to renovate it. So 86% of the surveyed municipalities call poor building fabric as a reason of demolition, but we also think it might be the lack of appreciation. For example, the Cityhöfe in Hamburg, which are already demolished. I think there are a lot of people also fighting for them, but still there are a lot of buildings demolished from this time 1950 to 1990. And when we think of what I showed in the beginning, how many buildings we already have, if we throw that all away, we cannot do that because already more than 50% of the waste generation in Germany comes from construction and demolition waste. And if we think of the climate protection agreement, we cannot waste all this gray energy we already invested. We have to keep it and bring it to the future. So what we need to do is to establish a conversion culture. The best, of course, is if the building can stay in its use like it was always supposed to be, like the glass cathedral from Walter Gropius. The owner is very invested in keeping it as a glass production, but of course that requires a little bit of work. But there are also examples like the Kulturpalast in Dresden, where they discussed the protection rules that there were. So they changed the facade a little bit, and they converted and expanded. But originally they wanted to demolish it, but they could keep it by changing some things, not being too strict with the protection rules. So they could bring it into the future, and now it's a very lively location. It also has a Baukultur center in the ground floor, so it works at all times of the day. But you could also reuse buildings completely, like this train station in Sangerhausen, which is a very small town, and it uses this old train station for a touristic information center, but also a library where children meet. So it's a very lively spot. But even if you don't see it in the first glance, like the examples I showed right now, they are very historic, valued buildings. But when you look at this is an old office building in Munich. Maybe you don't see the value at the beginning, but what Saarbrück did was they cut through the concrete floors and they renewed the facade. And this is a whole new building, but still by keeping the concrete structure, if you do the math, they saved up to 34 years of heating this building by keeping the concrete structure. And also small measures are working very well. So this wine store was renewed for not a lot of money, but it also had an economic value for him because now he can sell his wine from there. So you could also always mix certain aspects. It's not only the energetic renovation, but also an aesthetic value that puts up to that leads to economic value. So Baukultur is not only about the looks or the ecological aspects, but also economic aspects, of course. So what we're trying to say is that if you want to do an energetic renovation and remodeling, it's important that you improve the situation you have, not worsen it. Not only have the focus on the energetic renovation, but more like this example also in Hamburg, where they have a quarter of the 50s, and what they did was not only the energetic renovation, but they also enlarged the balconies and added some new buildings to it. So that is a good example of how you approach it in a holistic way. And of course, it's important to look what materials you're using, that you're using high quality materials. We have a lot of thermal insulation composite systems in Germany, already 13 square meters per person, and we do not yet know what to do with this waste later on. And also it's an aesthetic problem sometimes, as you see in this image. So it's also always a good idea to think outside of the box, as La Carton Vasal did in Paris, where they did not renovate the facade only, but they added a whole winter garden, which is like a puffer zone. I don't know if it's the right word, but it's a new way of thinking, new installation, and they also added a value for the inhabitants because they now have additional living space. the only downside maybe is that they had to use cheap materials because it's social housing, a plastic facade. It's always also good to think about what renewable sources can you use, like timber. In Germany, we are okay in single-family housing, but we could do more in multi-family dwelling. There's a lot of design potential and a lot of things you can do. There's already the highest high-rise built in a wood-concrete hybrid construction right now in Heilbronn. It's 10 stories high. So, and there are more in the building, in the process of being built right now. Also, timber is a good way to add additional stories, to build fast, to build prefabricated, but it's not only wood. You can also use recycled materials like recycled concrete, because what we are trying to do if we think of the climate change and the problems we have, is to come to a circular economy. So we have building material, and we are going to the process of construction. We are using the building, and then it comes to its life cycle, the end of the life cycle. So we are planning the conversion, the dismantling maybe, but or even the deconstruction. But we are not throwing away the parts, but we are keeping them. We are recycling them, reusing them, so they come into the new planning process, so that there's very, very few materials that are getting lost in this cycle, and very, very few raw materials that have to come new into the cycle. This is not a new idea. This was already published 1982 in a book from the government with the idea of this circular economy. But it's getting more and more urgent now that we feel the consequences of the climate change. So there are a lot of scientific researchers in this area that they are trying to plan buildings already with the dismantling in mind. So the connections of the parts are, you can reuse the material, you can build the building up and down again and build it somewhere else. And this is also not a very new idea. We have a World Heritage town, Quedlinburg, in Germany, where they have a warehouse of historical components, because the material is of high quality. They can use it for several hundred years. And if you have a historic building in Quedlinburg, you can go to this warehouse and get a new door or new tiles. So this idea already exists for a long time. If you use high quality material, that's also possible for a long time. And I have also brought a project, New Life for a Peat Shed. On the left, you see this shed that was about to be demolished, but an architect decided he wanted to save it, so they dismantled it and put it somewhere else, repaired the broken parts, and then rebuilt it at a different place where it also fit very good. And while they were doing this, they found that it was already been built down and up again for 3 times, because they found some different connections and old screws and stuff. And so this is already an old idea, that you can use buildings, dismantle them and build them somewhere else. And then they added this high insulated walls inside and put this building to a new life. And what we are trying to say with this example from Emanuel Heringer and Heike Roswak is that even though you have the digital tools maybe now to enhance this process, it's important to also have the Baukultur in mind and where we are coming from, because you can also learn a lot of from that. We of course have BIM, building information modeling, and or management, and we are now at the point where we are using 3D, 4D, 5D, and starting 6D, which means what I was just saying, having the life circle in mind and having all the elements managed in that way that you can maintain the building and have all the information needed for this process that I was just describing. So we think it's a complementary strategy. You have high-tech, experimental and new buildings, of course, but you also have low-tech that has been working for a long time, crafted in existing buildings. And so it's a combination of material research, architectural innovation, but also social reflection and the progress of Baukultur, where we are coming from and building up of that. A very important aspect of Baukultur is also a successful process. I don't know if everyone's familiar with the 9 phases we have in Germany for the building process, which starts with the design process, permit planning, construction planning, and then the actual building of the houses. And we added to that the phase 0 and the phase 10, which means the pre-planning, the project definition before you start, and then the phase 10, which is the maintenance. So it's very important to already think of the phase 10 in the phase 0. And for that, it's the best to bring everyone that's involved together for a solution-oriented dialogue, because a lot of times not everyone is heard and not everyone is involved, and that also brings a lot of problems. We call it the Baukultur dilemma, because the further along you go with your project, the less is the possibility to have influence on it from outside. But the more people are interested, they are starting to seeing the building site, they are starting to seeing the construction work, but then it's too late to do anything, because you don't have the conceptual freedom anymore. It's too expensive to change things. So what you should do is involve people as early as possible, which you can do by competitions. It's a good way of publishing what you are thinking of doing. There are still not enough competitions, we think, in Germany, especially when it comes to the engineering relevant tenders we have. It's only 0.1%, like 3. But you could also develop a basis for dialogue displays of Baukultur with city models of the construction works, so that everyone really understands. A lot of times participation is considered done by putting up a leaflet somewhere, and whoever wants to can read it. But we think it's good if you have an active approach. This can go as far as in Bayern, in Bavaria, where they even build up a possibility of the citizens to decide on budgets in the city. This might be a little bit too far, but yeah, as I said, active citizens information here in Eschwege, where they renewed the public space. The mayor invited people for a city walk. They had a 1-to-1 scale model of the new pavements, of the new furniture, city furniture. So everyone was involved in the process. When I come to public spaces, we think with a low budget and a free space, you can do a lot for also the surrounding buildings, which leads me to the Baukultur Report 2021 public spaces, which I will give you a quick glimpse in the end, so you know what we're working on. When you think of public spaces, usually people think of parks and squares, but it's much more than that. It's also publicly accessible spaces of buildings, it's crossing, passageways, underpasses, it's streets, it's rivers. So we did a kind of Nolly plan of Cologne, where you see that the cathedral, the museum, the central station, but also the streets and the water, everything that's blue is public space, so it's a lot. Which also explains in this picture, you see up front this little diagrams that usually a third or even up to half of the city, as in Berlin, consists of public spaces. And what we find is that those spaces have very different sectors, like the greenery, the private transport, the public transport, facades and balconies. And we think the most important thing is that the responsibilities should be coordinated. So there should be one person not in control, but responsible for all those sectors to work together, because usually right now we have someone builds up something for the public transport, and at the same time the street is getting renewed, and so there are a lot of problems coming from that, not only design-wise but also in the functions. So yeah, we think we should overcome the sectoral thinking in the public spaces. This leads also again to the phases 0 and phase 10, which are even more important in the public spaces than they are in buildings, because the phase 10 is the longest time in public spaces. They are built up and then they are done, and most of the times they are not maintained. They are not. The maintenance is lacking, because then it's done, and we think the communities need more money to care for the public spaces so that they are used. There are good examples, like this bridge in Ulm, which was a design contest where there had to be a collaboration of architects and engineers. So, and it's also a nice public space, because you can have a view over the city from there. You have benches integrated in the structure, and it's a connection of different city parts. We think public spaces are a prerequisite. So like in Hamburg, Hafen City, they built up the public spaces before the buildings were there. So it's already very accepted before even people move there, because people come there from other parts of the town to see the new public spaces, to experience them. You could also use temporary projects to try out new public spaces, new connections in the city, like this temporary bridge in Lübeck. And it's also a very good measure for civic engagement. This city of Stuttgart forbid parking below this streets, and a lot of people came together to held incentives to have events there, and this further before very dark and empty and neglected space came to life through that. And the most important thing, I think, is adding up on what I just said the past half hour, that the most important thing is we are in a cycle. We are in like an Escher stairway of developing, planning, building, operating, and then again developing. And the most important thing is to shake hands on this stairwell and look to the other side and talk to each other in this cyclical process. And that brings me to my end, and thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the discussion now.